Hello everybody, it's Wyron here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 Quick Magic gameplay. So this time around we are on the map Galbaraz for a bit of Greenskin against Tomb King action. So, the Greenskins of course do have a lot of issues with fear and terror, things that the Tomb Kings have aplenty. The Tomb Kings also do have a very strong repertoire of with the Ushapti Great Bows, who of course can snipe down units like Black Orcs with general ease. They have pretty cheap archers that can shoot down lightly armored troops like Savage Orcs and all that. So definitely they have a decent variety of troops that can cause you great trouble as Greenskins. So I kind of built a comp here that I was hoping could deal with them in an efficient manner. So for my lord, of course, I did bring Azag. The Tomb Kings don't have much in the way of flyers. They do have, of course, Carrion, but Carrion are basically bats. They're pretty trashy. So it's not something I'm too worried about. Azag is pretty good up in the air. He's got not great armor, but 70 armor is okay. 4,300 HP, melee attack at 50 and causing poison, of course. Huge charge bonus of 80, decent weapon strength with AP, and melee defense is definitely on the weak side, but he's very mobile on his Wyvern on the Skull Muncher. It's definitely very, very strong. I did give him Foe Seeker just so he could kind of escape from sticky situations. Wah, just to buff nearby troops. Sons of Tomb King Infantry does have very high melee defense, so this can come in very handy. Fate of Buna, as well as Spirit Leech, just to nuke down high-value targets or high-value lords. It's important to keep in mind, of course, that Tomb Kings don't have much in the way of healing. They obviously do have their faction trait, but it's nowhere near as powerful as it is in the as the amount of heals that, for example, Vampire Counts can put out with the help of the Invocation of Nag. Alongside Azag, to get some cheaper spells, as well as to get the Wand of Jet, I do have the Night Goblin Shaman on foot. Of course, he doesn't have an option outside of being on foot, but he does have Itchy Nuisance just to debuff enemies, as well as Sneaky Stabbing, which is dirt cheap damage buff or attack buff and damage buff, which can definitely help some of my units in just dicing up enemy troops if needed. And of course, the Wand of Jet, nice cheap little improvement to power recharge rate and power reserves. For my front line, in the very, very front, I do have a unit of goblins as well as the Warlord's Boys, which are the Night Goblins with Armor Sundering, of course to debuff enemy constructs and units like that. These guys do have an immunity psychology, and of course both Goblin units have Silver Shields, which I'm hoping that if my opponent has brought a bunch of archers, these guys will really be able to just tank through it and mitigate the damage coming in. Behind that, we do have 5 units of Savage Orcs. Savage Orcs will shred through the vast majority, if not all, of the infantry Tomb Kings can put on the field. Obviously, they're very susceptible to shooting due to their 0 armor, but they're very quick on their feet. They can gap close very quickly and then shred through Tomb King infantry in a matter of seconds before kind of collapsing on their backline. And of course, with Frenzy, they will be immune to fear and terror, at least as long as their leadership holds out, over 50%. Behind that, 2 units of Savage Orc Big Guns. These guys are there to provide me with a bit of an anti-large boost. They do have monstrous melee attack of 48, so these guys, if I need to, for example, if my opponent has some Tomb Guard, these guys will definitely do the trick. They can definitely kind of end that problem. Of course, all the Savage Orcs do have a 25% physical resist, which is huge. As you can see, the Savage Orc Big Guns, alongside a monster charge bonus of 37, they do have a bonus versus large of 8, but also armor piercing damage of 13. Now, I know normal Big Guns are kind of more popular, but I felt that the speed here could be useful, as well as the somewhat just the higher melee attack. I felt that the combination of those two could definitely be very useful. As you can see, they have over 100 HP per model, so these guys are absolute beasts in melee. On the flanks, of course, I was very concerned with these constructs and dealing with them and dealing with large monstrous troops. And so out on the flanks, on one end, I do have a unit of Squig Hoppers alongside the Orc Boar Boy Big Guns, of course, for armor piercing anti-large. Similar case on the other end where we have the Durkit Squigs alongside the Broken Tusk Mob. Of course, backed by the Mogreb's Magi Marauders, which are the AP Goblin Wolf Rider Archers. Now, in case you're wondering why I'm bringing Squig Hoppers instead of some of the cheaper poison alternatives, there's actually a dual reason for this. First of all, these guys have armor piercing, so obviously the bonus against infantry won't help very much, but that armor piercing definitely could. And second of all, they have immunity psychology, which is huge. Once again, one of the big problems for Orc Cavalry is that once they get into the fight, oftentimes, despite being anti-large, supposedly good against large targets, they will then rout due to fear and terror. But this way, I'm really hoping that my support tools that are applying that poison will not rout. Now, my opponent definitely went with an alternative or very different route with his army here. For his lord, as you can see here, High Queen Khalida, who is basically a go-to, and I've seen her in almost every matchup at this point, if not every matchup. And personally, I'm not entirely convinced she's the best lord. My personal opinion is that Arkan the Black is actually the best lord choice for the Tomb Kings. But nonetheless, she is very, very potent, and as you can see here, with her high melee stats, she'll definitely be a pain in the rear. She also does have Venom Wave, which is an AoE kind of knockback that also applies poison. Blessing of Asaph, which buffs nearby shooting units, and as you can see, she's maximizing the value here by staying amongst all these Ushapti. And then finally, she does have her venom staff, which is a kind of shrapnel frag missile, similar to, I do believe, Skarsnake's Prodder. Alongside that, of course, she does have a whole bunch of shooting here in the front line, kind of deployed forward. Not necessarily vanguarded, but definitely very far in the front. You can see they're already picking off my high-value targets, going after my broken tusk mob, and doing some immense work with their high-power arrows. You can see the Ushabti here sitting at 171 missile damage. So absolutely monstrous. Obviously, that is with the buffs from High Queen Khalida, who is providing. If we look at the exact buff, it's plus 15 reload skill, plus 15% missile damage, and plus 15% armor piercing missile damage. These guys are just getting monstrous damage buffs. I do believe they're hitting for like almost 50 more damage than usual, or over it's 50 damage more over 10 seconds. Out on the flank, my opponent does have the Chosen of the Gods, who are immediately opening fire on the Savage Orcs because they are, of course, squishy targets, and my opponent can't see the Warlord's boys. Definitely a very good choice. These guys will definitely do some great work. I did not decide to bring Black Orcs though this time. It might seem like a decent choice given the lack of shooting, armor-piercing shooting for the Tomb Kings, but actually I felt like Black Orcs would be very susceptible to Ushabti with Great Bows, and they're definitely very overkill in my opinion when dealing with the low tier and chaff infantry. And if you need to deal with large, in my opinion, the anti-large bonus on the Savage Orc Big Guns is adequate. So behind that, my opponent, of course, wary of any possibility of me kind of fielding cavalry to shut down his units. He does have 3 units of Sepulchral Stalkers, who of course are very powerful against large targets with a bonus against large, good speed 50. Not a great charge bonus, but definitely solid melee defense at 36. Melee attack's not great, but they do have that bonus against large, 80 armor, and 107 missile damage, which they can use to kind of support themselves. Here for his quote-unquote frontline, my opponent does have 6 units of Skeleton Warriors. These guys are really not going to hold much of anything, but they can provide kind of a front line for my opponent's Ushabti to flee behind once needed. My opponent also does have a Lich Priest of Nakar over here with some buffs and improvements for his troops. He does have Nefero's Scroll of Mighty Incantations, which is some sort of AoE increase to power recharge rate and power reserves, which is improved depending on depending on number of friendly units nearby. He does have the Traz Incantation of Righteous Smiting, once again to buff missile damage, so definitely very crazy investments in that area. There is an Incantation of Protection, physical resistance, as well as Jaff's Incantation of Cursed Blades for extra weapon damage and AP damage. And of course, Restless Dead. Out on the flank, my opponent does have a super veteran up unit of Carrion. I'm sorry, I do apologize, guys, for the long-winded intro here, but I definitely wanted to kind of cover everything. And as you can see, we're gap closing very quickly here. You can see I'm poking away with Mogrim's Meiji Marauders. They are doing a little bit of damage through Ushabti Great Bows. My opponent did not bring a Necrotect, so he doesn't have any heals. In my personal opinion, I think Necrotect is actually one of the best choices, or best units for the... actually, in my opinion, one of the best units for the Tomb Kings. And you might be wondering why, but the reason is because... And as you can see, the frag shot from Khalida hitting the Durkit Squigs doing a bit of damage. But the reason I actually think it's one of the best choices for the Tomb Kings is because it provides you with some good melee sort of staying power that can support your infantry in the front line, providing that encourage effect and all that sort of stuff. But also because, of course, he can heal your troops. He can heal your constructs and very effectively. Here you can see, of course, the Broken Tusk Mob are having a really bad time of things just because they have been slaughtered so badly by the fire from the Ushabti Great Bows, but they will still be able to damage the Sepulchral Stalkers pretty effectively, and I do dive in with Azag, pop that attack buff with Wa, and of course that is going to affect a lot of these units in just an absolutely amazing fashion. Sepulchral Stalkers are going to start getting torn down very, very quickly. You can see the Durkit Squigs doing some amazing work actually, because of course they do have that AP. You can see these poor Sepulchral Stalkers are going to get dragged into the muck, and they only have 38 mobility, so with the Durkit Squigs applying that poison, they will struggle to get away in time as the Savage Orc mob kind of surrounds them and starts dragging them into the muck. My opponent gives up on escaping and allows them to stay in the fight here, which means that they're going to go down like a bunch of 9-pins. Over here on this flank, in the meantime, you can see the Chosen of the Gods have been dragged into the muck by the Night Goblin Squig Hoppers and Orc Boy Big Guns, backed by Savage Orcs, and of course the Savage Orcs now are plowing into my opponent's front line. Here, High Queen Khalida has been forced to bail out, and of course the Savage Orcs now are in the fray, and they're going to start shredding these Skeleton Warriors with contemptuous ease. Here I've withdrawn this crippled Regiment of Renown unit of cavalry, just to kind of recoup. Here in the back I do have Goblins and Savage Orcs kind of sitting in reserve for now, even as I do start pushing my Night Goblin Shaman forward, and I do start casting a debuff with the Itchy Nuisance, of course, hitting all these Skeleton Warriors, bring them down to size, making them a lot weaker. Of course, here the Savage Orc Big Guns are just going to plow through the Skeleton Warriors in a matter of seconds, open up the flank, and allow me to dive in on the squishy backline. Over here, my opponent is trying to send some carrion in, so I'm going to interdict with Azag, who of course is going to start bringing these guys and munching on these poor nasty vultures, and of course Skullmuncher just crushing them like bugs. Over here, Durkit Squigs plowing into the skeleton warriors. You can see the heal going down, which of course is going to allow us to summon a Ushapti. Over here, Durkit Squigs about to jump into the Ushapti, or Squig Hoppers about to jump into the Ushapti Great Bows, and they will soon be backed by Orc Boy Big Guns. Of course, some of my Savage Orcs are routing, but nonetheless, the rest of them are sticking around, crushing the skeleton warriors, really having a great time of it. And as these skeletons get wiped out, I'm going to be able to collapse my opponent's troops with these Savage Orc Big Guns. And of course, with that bonus against large, these guys are absolute nightmares for you, even for heavily armored troops such as the Ushapti Great Bows and Sepulchral Stalkers. You can see they're just tearing them down in a matter of seconds. In spite of my opponent's best efforts to kind of buff them and make them much more resistant. Over here, Azag is diving in on Queen Kalita, hitting her with Spirit Leech. Of course, I haven't really had much use for Fate of Buna. There simply aren't units that are ideal targets for that year, but Spirit Leech will do against High Queen Kalita, just melting her down and making her very weak against very angry Azag, who of course with Wa as well as Foe Seeker will be able to hit her with basically almost every hit. And you can see here, he has 94 melee attacks, so definitely very monstrous. In the pits here, in the meantime, you can see the Lich Priest not really doing much. You can see the Broken Tusk Mob plowing into the back of these Ushapti Great Bows, who are being debuffed by Itchy Nuisance. That means that these guys have no melee attack, actually, currently, because their melee attack is not particularly good. And Itchy Nuisance is just huge against these poor buggers. And you can see they're really getting shredded. Azag's going to dive down, disrupt them, and they are getting driven down, dragged into the muck by a bunch of angry Savage Orc Big Guns. So definitely very brutal. You can see my infantry at this point has mopped up the back line and is now collapsing on the last remnants of my opponent's troops as we simply fast forward as the Lich Priest does collapse. So definitely I think there are still obviously issues with people's compositions and issues with my composition as well as my opponent's composition. So nobody quite knows what to do with Tomb Kings. I definitely think one of my opponent's key mistakes here was not bringing Necrotect to back up his very construct heavy build. If you're investing in this many constructs, I think it's worthwhile to bring that Necrotect. Definitely more so than the Lich Priest. I've definitely been seeing a lot of High Queen Kalita, and personally I'm not that sold on her. She is definitely a good melee lord, but definitely very susceptible to lord sniping with things like Spirit Leech, and she's still somewhat squishy. She's not the most amazing or tankiest of lords. So I'm not convinced. She's definitely on the cheaper end, and I think that's part of the reason why she's popular. But I personally, I've definitely become a fan of Arkan. I think Arkan on the horse is just a very powerful spellcaster. You get great utility with the Lore of Death, backed up by some solid items and solid sort of damage mitigators and stuff like that. So definitely very solid there. For this composition, as far as this composition is concerned, I definitely think that the blob of Savage Orcs is very powerful against the Tomb Kings. You can kind of get into their troops, crush their squishy infantry, and then move on to the bigger stuff. The Savage Orc Big Guns, of course, are monstrous against monsters. Not trying to make a pun there, or make any jokes there, be ridiculous, but they're definitely very good against monstrous troops, such as Ushapti or Sepulchral Stalkers or units like that. They can tear them down very quickly and bring them down to size with rather good in a rather good amount of time. It is of course very useful to bring a Night Goblin Shaman for the debuffs, and of course it's important to bring some sort of anti-large and poison preferably. If my opponent had, for example, brought a Necrosphinx, I definitely would have needed those Broken Tusk mobs and those Durkit Squigs to shut them down as best as possible with the backing of the Morgrom's Mangy Marauders. The Savage Orc Big Guns would have most likely not been adequate. So definitely some of those things to keep in mind. Nonetheless, I think this is definitely a very solid composition. You just have to be wary of your opponent bringing a lot of archers, as this army comp did not really have any counter against skeleton horse archers. My opponent was simply been able to wipe me out. So that was definitely a bit of a mistake on my part, and I could have definitely kind of counteracted that by, for example, bringing a handful of Savage Orc archers or perhaps some sort of archer unit, just to counteract enemy shooting of that nature. Nonetheless, great game to my opponent, RO1Z. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. Definitely a very cool build here, trying to mix and match that horde of constructs. I definitely think the weakish front line, and I think there was a little bit too much investment into the constructs. You definitely don't need this match anti-large, in my opinion, against the Tomb Kings, and you might be better, or against the Orcs, and you might be better off just bringing spears or something and playing a little bit more safely, because the Boar Boys and Squigs are just so squishy, they will get dragged into the muck by rather low-end anti-large troops. So I think you definitely don't need such high-end anti-large like Sepulchral Stalkers. Nonetheless, great game to my opponent. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, any questions about the game or anything like that, be sure to post them down in the comments and I'll respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Bye for now.